Welcome to Make a Plan with Bob and Dan. Today's episode is on everyone's favorite issue, difficult resident discharges. I'm Dan Bulk, an associate in the healthcare practice.
And I'm Bob Lightfoot, a shareholder here at Reinhardt.
And a registered nurse.
So,
Bob, what are some of the basic legal requirements when discharging a resident?
Well, if you're going to discharge someone, you obviously got to have a reason. So almost all categories, in fact, all categories of healthcare, be that nursing home regulations, assisted living regulations, you're going to have to do a notice. They pretty much are all 30-day written advance notice requirements. And obviously that's something we do a lot. We look at a lot of those for clients, make sure they conform so that that 30 days doesn't have to start over again because it gets kicked back.
So how much detail should a facility typically include in the notice? What do you advise clients?
Well, there's a couple approaches you can take. The first would be to be sort of over-inclusive and put a little bit of your argument in there of why specifically, maybe some additional information, the notice is actually, you're having to actually give the notice. It's really up to the provider which method they want to choose there. Either one will be fine.
Okay. So you said previously it's typically 30 days for a discharge notice. Is there any emergency discharge?
There is emergency discharge provisions for every category, nursing home, RCAC, adult family home, except CBRFs do not have in the regulations an emergency discharge provision. If you back up to 8327, there's actually a provision in there that says you may not retain a resident who is aggressive or abusive to others. It would sort of infer that even though there's not an emergency discharge provision, that this may let you do that, but we still would recommend you do a 30-day discharge in any event.
Okay. What are some of the options? Could you describe briefly what the options are for a CBRF if they're having a very difficult, like a resident with very difficult behaviors, or they want to do something analogous to an emergency discharge?
Well, the first thing is you got to make sure you've exhausted all your means of trying to resolve the situation. Meeting with a family, if that doesn't work, meet with a resident if you can. Bring in the ombudsman. And document all of this along the way so you're really building a strong case of why you need to get the discharge accomplished. If all those fail, I would go to your assisted living regional director in your region, and if that fails, I'd go right to Alfred Johnson. I know he's very willing to listen to issues like this and help you work through those. So I would actually try and take care of all of that before you do anything more drastic that we may talk about.
Okay. So once you've discharged, you've given the notice of discharge, what's the next step? Can the resident do anything to fight it?
Yeah, they can appeal. Obviously, there's an appeal provision, except, once again, if you have, you've issued a notice of discharge, if you're an RCAC or an adult family home, there is no appeal right for a resident there. If you discharge them, they cannot appeal. We have had cases where families have submitted an appeal to the Division of Hearings and Appeals, doing an administrative appeal under Chapter 227. Now, if someone is going to appeal if they're a nursing home or CBRF, though, there are strict guidelines that they have to follow to appeal that discharge, and they certainly can appeal that discharge. And you've just got to be diligent. You follow the procedure. It's laid out right in the regulation in DHS 132 for nursing homes and DHS 83 for CBRFs.
Right. And those appeal requirements need to be in the notice as well that you provide the resident.
Correct. Do not forget about that. Otherwise, like we said, you're going to have to reset that 30-day discharge, and now you're going to be looking at a 60-day situation instead of a 30-day.
Sure. So the appeal has gone to, or the resident has appealed the discharge. What is the regional director considering when they're reviewing an appeal?
What have you documented? Does everything that you've submitted in support of the discharge support the discharge itself? These are very difficult situations, and we've had a number of these we've worked through with clients at very high levels and have to go to the state. So what you want to do is just make sure that you've got things documented, that you have appropriately assessed. I know the state will try, and sometimes DHS will say, well, maybe this is someone you shouldn't have admitted up front. Well, I know, because I represent providers, that many times they don't get all the information up front. They did the best they could. This is what the admission showed. For some reason, they couldn't get hospital records of previous violent behaviors or whatever. So it's not always the case that you shouldn't have accepted this person. Be sure you review your assessment, review your assessment policies, and make sure those are all, up to snuff, so that when you go to the assisted living director on an appeal, you can say, well, this was not a case where we got caught red-handed because we shouldn't have admitted this person. We had all the information available, and this was a change in condition. This was something that changed about this resident.
Okay. Now, to bring it all together, what should a facility do if they're considering an involuntary discharge? If it's a resident that they foresee them potentially appealing or it being a difficult discharge?
Well, you've got to have things documented. You've got to make sure you've run your course of trying everything possible, talking to the family, seeking out the assistance of the ombudsman, going to the state, going to DHS, talking to Alfred Johnson, and really doing everything possible to try and resolve that situation before you get to the point with these very difficult discharge issues that we've run across. Be sure you've done all that, and then if nothing else fails, give us a call. We've worked through a number of these before. We can certainly help you with that.
Okay. And finally, what steps can a facility take long term when they're not even contemplating a discharge yet? What should they be doing in advance?
Make sure their admission agreement is up to snuff, and we'll talk about that in another episode. Look at your policies and procedures on discharges. Make sure that when you issue that notice of discharge that it's up to snuff. Those are all things in advance you can do to make sure that these discharges go as smoothly as possible for you. And if not, do some of the things we talked about just now.
Okay. Well, that's it for this week. Join us next week for admission agreements.